Given my previous video, Never Give Up Decoded, I thought it might be important to talk about the notion of ideals and whether or not they're worth striving for. Because a lot of people routinely, and this is something I've experienced now for years and years, either purposely misunderstand what I'm trying to say, or just don't, or glossing over the things I say. And more broadly, I think this is an important topic to address regardless. But the problem here is the sense of realism that ideals are often very much decoupled from. What is realistic and what is not? What is probable and what is not? Because part of the issue these days, in 2024, the peak of mass media, because each year it gets worse and worse, is that a lot of people, especially young men, but not exclusively, are misled by essentially what could only be described as information overload. So much information out there about what you can do, what you should do, what ought you do, that whatever self-directed decision making might be present tends to be diverted and redirected. And a perfect example of this, of course, is the esteemed, wise, and erudite philosopher Jeremy Meeks. Obviously, most people realize that what he has achieved is not a reasonable goal. He went to jail, but because he's very attractive, he ended up becoming a supermodel. Most people get it. And most people also get the meme, this ridiculous notion that you should never give up, that you should always continue hustling, etc., in light of the particulars of his life, essentially. But not everything out there is as benign, if you want to even call it benign, as the Jeremy Meeks meme. Because I've talked about this quite a bit. You have all these gurus out there that are working within the attention economy, and that's what this is, to draw on new acolytes, new disciples, new people that are going to give them money, among other things, and capture their attention. And that's where things can really go awry. What is a realistic goal and what is not? Well, in the modern era of 2024, with mass media, within the context of the attention economy, that is what's become very, very blurry, very, very distorted, and very difficult to discern. And that's where I want to approach this from. I did also talk about Never Give Up, this Swedish character who, through what seems to be a miracle, acquired something that many men who have done, quote-unquote, all the right things that do not have his limitations cannot acquire. And my point here was pretty simple. It's not worth striving for something if you don't broadly fit the criteria of that something, which is to say, he is a fluke in what he's achieved, not a role model. Okay, so you have a lot of these people out there who are peddling certain ideas, mostly to enrich themselves, mostly to mislead, not even necessarily maliciously, but for the sake of self-interest. I think Hamza, aka Bathrobe Man, is a very good example of this. A guy who's turned out to be not just pernicious, but absolutely transparent in how pernicious he is and in his dishonesty. This quote-unquote university, and a lot of people have woken up to this. But this is what I mean about the hijacking of the attention span. So you had a lot of young guys, teenage boys basically, who were sucked in by Bathrobe Man for the longest time, and many of them still are, because they have no ideals to strive for on their own, which is to say they have few interests of their own. They have few things they've discovered during the course of their short lives that might serve as motivation to strive for such things. You know, the old-fashioned hokey notions of you discover something that you're interested in, and then you say as a child, as a boy, I want to be X when I grow up. I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a basketball player, whatever it might be. But what I've seen increasingly to be the case in recent years is whole legions of young men, teenage boys, without any such aspirations, without even an inkling of what they might want to do in their lives, not just in terms of work, but in terms of what drives them. Now, it is true that not everyone has these particular drives, and not everyone has a particular set of interests that pushes them in a certain direction. That's 100% true. But most people have something that gets them going. And what the attention economy does, as well as the gurus and hucksters, is they try to hijack that attention, prevent such people, specifically young men, from discovering themselves, essentially, what makes them tick as individuals, and redirect it to whatever they're selling. And so this is why you see oftentimes this ideal of simply making tons of money and getting lots of women, because it's a very broad, not particularly abstract goal that a lot of men would like to have. A lot of men would like to have more money. A lot of men would like to get women, etc., etc., but it's certainly not tailored to the individual. And I'd argue it's not even an ideal. Ideals are difficult to pin down. For my own part, I would say an ideal is something that, in the best case scenario, you as an individual would like to achieve. Now, it might be the case that getting a GF and getting more money is an ideal you'd like to achieve, but that's such a universal goal that it doesn't really tell you anything about the individual wants and needs of a young man and what he wants to do in life. And so that's really the crux of the issue. All this attention being diverted away from what's realistic, as well as from the ability to discover for themselves what young men actually want to do with their lives. And as you're aware, I recently talked to Sir Gerbert Johnson, the greatest rapper who ever lived. And he's just such an individual. He's not really sure where he wants to go in life other than perhaps get married and have a family. And some men are like that. But I can't help but think that also in his case, his attention was hijacked by the attention economy away from a path of self-discovery that might have allowed him to figure out what his wants and needs are at the individual level. And it just so happens that he's a very large YouTuber and very prominent, but he suffered from this problem just as anyone else has in his age group. And so in essence, what is good, what you should be striving for, is not that easy to determine in today's day and age, if you think about it. Because there's so many forces vying for your attention, trying to rip you away from any effort on your own part to discover what that might be. And it's a trap. But let's say you are able to push past the attention economy for a while, and you're able to discover things you might want to do with your life, things that you have a passion for, things you have an interest in, etc., etc. Well, that's where my other point in the previous video really becomes relevant, because my view is not that you should simply give up, do nothing, and rot away, like some people seem to think. Rather, you should attempt something, discover whether or not you have any aptitude for it, whether or not your rate of improvement is satisfactory, not just to you, but on a broader metric when comparing yourself to others. And then you could recalibrate, either deciding you want to continue it because it makes sense given your recalibration, given your considerations, and the fact that at this point in time you've probably thought about it a fair bit, and then you can move on. Or not, depending on what conclusions you come to. I mean, there's no point to just ramming your head against a wall over and over and over again if the wall isn't budging, if you have not done anything to the wall, you're just injuring your head. That's a bit of a crude analogy, but a lot of people equate quote-unquote giving up with, again, just wasting away, rotting away. No, it's about strategically figuring out where your strengths lie, what you should be spending time on versus other things. Now, this isn't advice. I'm just saying this is how I view things. And people out there, whether it's Jeremy Meeks, Hamza the Bathrobe Man, or even Never Give Up, who presents himself as a quote-unquote normal case despite being highly anomalous, these are all people, whether by intention or not, and I don't necessarily think that Never Give Up is actually malicious, that are trying to draw your attention away from yourself as an individual onto themselves, rather than for you to discover what you're all about. And it's really, really hard these days. Distractions everywhere. I know. I don't read nearly as much as I used to because there's always something online going on that catches my attention. I get sucked in. 20 minutes later, I might get sucked into a new thing, and so on and so forth. It's not a fun cycle. But imagine growing up in this era where you can't even focus enough to discover what you should be striving for, i.e. what your ideals are as an individual. It's really hard. I mean, case in point, this never happened, but when I was growing up, for, I would say, the first 12 years of my life, I was convinced that I wanted to be a zoologist. To this day, I still have a pretty pronounced interest in animals and ecology and things of this nature, and obviously it didn't happen that way, but it was something I wanted to strive for, and at the very least, I retained that interest. And I'm not saying that's impossible in today's day and age. It's just a lot harder. And if you talk to young people, and I have, when you talk about the range of interests, it's really pretty limited. It's really just watching videos, playing video games, and that's it. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I can't help but think that given a different environment and a removal of the so-called attention economy, they probably would have a lot more to say about what interests them, what motivates them, what moves them. So, should you be striving for ideals? Well, first, you need to discover what those ideals are. And I've laid out the case as to why it's so difficult to figure out what those are in today's day and age. But let's say you do discover your ideals. How do you pursue them? What is a reasonable way to approach these sorts of things? It's not blindly going in and just never giving up and, again, smashing your head against a wall over and over. You have to have some finesse here. You have to have some consideration to think about these things. As a final point, I think a lot of people, either willfully or not, misinterpret the things I say as a kind of lie around in your bed, rot, stare at the ceiling, and do absolutely nothing. If somebody wants to do that, by all means, I'm not going to try to stop them, but that is not what I'm saying, and that is never what I've been saying. What I try to do with almost the entirety of everything I say on this channel is to move past the hyperbolic idealism of the current era, of the attention economy, of the gurus, move past a lot of the lies and dishonesty that is spread throughout the current setup and society. And then after you've stripped away everything that is dishonest, that's insincere, things that are simply not true, things that don't stand up to scrutiny or reality itself, then that's when you start working on yourself. That's when you start building yourself up. And then you at least try to figure out who you are as an individual and what your goals are and the things you want to do with your life. But notice here, and it's very important that I make this point, I'm not being prescriptive. If anything, I hate most prescriptions. I'm not saying thou shalt, you must do this. And that's the problem. People want easy, tailor-made solutions to everything, and I don't have them. But I don't have them because I'm being honest. The other people don't have them either. What I can do is say, look, there are all these things that are serving as obstacles, and you might, particularly as a young man, not be aware of these things as such. So, for example, you might not necessarily be aware as a 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old guy that the attention economy is sapping your own attention paid to yourself and redirecting it elsewhere at the cost of your own well-being and improvement. And from there, with some luck, you might be able to discover something about yourself that might push you further along your life journey. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. Many, many special thanks to my patrons and donors on PayPal. As I've said many times, and I will never cease saying, you guys are the best. You keep the channel alive, given what YouTube is doing to this channel at the current moment. You guys are simply amazing. So many, many thanks indeed, patrons and PayPal donors. And in general, if you can leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe, purportedly this helps. It would be appreciated regardless. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Until then, if I'm still alive, check you out later. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.